Okay, we're good to go?
With the housekeeping, yes.
Yeah, great, thank you. So, hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name's Matthew White, and it's my honour to welcome Lyndon Smith, Miles Manning, and Harry Tangye from Consulting Cops. Consulting Cops is a consultancy service to help writers authenticate their work by pairing them with law enforcement experts who've experienced for real their written project. And I'll ask the guys to introduce themselves and talk a little bit more about Consulting Cops in a moment, but first we're going to do the usual housekeeping. So Lyndon, Miles, and Harry are going to share some of their experiences and deconstruct some well-known TV clips for our enjoyment. And then we'll go to a Q&A. So you can ask the questions to the guys in the usual way. So open the chat window, and if you want to use the chat window for banter away. But if it's a question, please type question in capital letters at the beginning so that our team can pick it up and then can share it with me so I can ask it. If your question is selected, I'll ask you to unmute yourself and ask away, and I'll try to queue up the next person too so you're ready. You unmute by clicking on the unmute button on your app. Unmute button at the bottom of your app. And please ask in the chat if there's anything you're unsure about. Please try to keep things short and sweet because there's going to be a lot to get through in the session. And when you're done, please mute yourself again. Excuse me. If you'd rather I read your question out for you after I clear my throat, then please say so in the question text, okay? And finally, don't send me any private messages about asking your question because I'm not reading them. So without any further ado, Lyndon, Miles, and Harry, can you please say hello?
Hello.
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 Harry.
Can I start? Well, I'm Lyndon Smith. I'm a ex-DS. I retired actually 2 years yesterday, so it flies by. It's unbelievable. And I really started consulting cops because I got fed up, probably like a lot of experts, of watching cop shows where there was always obvious faults. So I thought, well, what can I do about that? How were they getting that information in the first place? And I looked it up, and I found most consultants were DCIs or above, higher ranks, and they were obviously advising people who were writing scripts or making TV programs. And I thought, well, I'm not being funny, but once you're a superintendent, you've been in the job 20, 30 years, and you probably haven't interviewed a suspect for 15 years. You haven't been out on the street for 15 years. How are you getting it right? So I thought, well, how can I solve that? So Consulting Cops is really, I think at the books at the moment, we've got 40 odd people, different ranks, some serving, some not, some from all over the country. Because if you're writing a story and you're based in Glasgow and you want to write it in London, how do you find out how London run a murder or how London do any inquiries? So I thought, well, let's get a load of people from different areas, different experience, and help people with their writing. It's up to you how much you make, how real you want to make it, but if you speak to the right people, you'll get the right advice of how they do it. Let me pass you on to Harry.
Hello, I'm Harry. I've been retired for probably about 3 weeks now. It's amazing. But welcome, and thank you very much everyone for coming in. It's really intriguing. My role, I was in Devon and Cornwall, so in the southwest, and I've been for 30 years on policing in the Golden Triangle, they call it, between Torquay, Plymouth and Exeter. And I specialise in armed response. And because we have less gun crime than a lot of people, but we have the same drug issues, unfortunately, as everyone else, we are dual-rolled with roads policing as well. So I specialise in the serious and fatal road traffic collision. I'm pursuit tactics advisor, I'm firearms tactics advisor, operational firearms commander, all the toys really, fast cars and guns. And so that was really my specialism. And I was asked to be a part of Consulting Cops. And do you know what? It's really interesting because I remember so often, and I tell myself off before I watch something. And sometimes I just watch it on a Netflix thing. And I watched the first thing and I said, you know what, I can't, it's winding me up too much. Others, like Luther or something, I'm sort of detached from the whole thing. I'm in mystery land. But I think, do you know what, I think there's a halfway between. I think you can make it so much more, what's the word? You know, realistic, but that's a poor word, but there's a much better one. I'm not an author, you can tell. So much, but also have the drama, because the real stuff isn't very dramatic a lot of the time either. So that's where I'm from. Over to who next?
It's me, I think. Yeah, my name's Miles Manning. I'm retired 3 years ago. The Metropolitan Police did 30 years, 9,611 days I worked out and enjoyed every single one of them.
Yeah.
I, with consulting cops, basically to save my relationship, so that I can sit down and watch a TV program with my other half, and actually stop there and go, "Oh, that wouldn't happen, and all the arguments that ensue on the settee downstairs. Whilst we're watching that sort of TV programs involving police. So it's a plea, save my relationship by getting a little bit more realistic. So for me, I was uniformed down the West End, February 1996. I got a little bit too close to a IRA bomb, so they took me off the streets for what was supposed to be 3 years, but I never went back, and I ended up in the darkened world of in the intelligence. So the two, Harry and Lyndon, are proper cops, but I'm sort of not so much. I haven't arrested very many people for over the years. Started off in surveillance and test purchasing, that sort of stuff at a local level and area level, and then I went on into a murder squad and did quite a few jobs around London there. Ended up in witness protection 4 or 5 years, which was fantastic. Loved that immensely. Edmonton, as a detective sergeant, stupidly got promoted, where I met Lyndon, who is one of the best cops I've had the pleasure of working with, an outstanding investigator. I then went back to the covert world when I joined counter-terrorism command about 10 years back, when I worked on the covert functions, radicalisation in prisons sort of world. But if we go back to the murder squad in about 2002, when there weren't any need for covert opportunities, they sort of asked me to do family liaison, which is the link between the investigation and the actual family itself. And we could do hours on that role itself. And so I was one of the first officers to be trained in that role, and I spent a lot of time with families, you know, dealing with those who have lost loved ones through murder. I ended up on the tsunami, did a lot of work on the tsunami, and then I did a lot of work in family coordination side of things. So on top of my role in counter-terrorism, I also run the family liaison coordination side as well. So I was deployed out in Sousse after the attack there, out in Belgium after the attack there, and in France a couple of times as well. So that's me in a nutshell. And like I say, I've joined this. I think it's an absolutely fascinating sort of project, and I'm hoping that we can be of some use to all of you out there.
Lyndon, I think we've been outdone there. He's got the coolest, he's got the most dangerous job.
I was never a proper cop.
You say you're way too humble, my friend, way too humble. Yeah. Really, I mean, just test purchaser alone, wow, you know, and then you go on into further from that. It's incredible. So, no, good skills there, Miles.
Well, I would say the test purchase in my favour was I've bought so much porn. You wouldn't believe the amount of porn. Anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, nothing to do with policing.
Yeah, and what a time to come in and say we're going to play a clip.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your introduction. That's an amazing range of experiences. And so, Joe, I was wondering if you could cue up the first clip, and let's have a look at this. Okay, that was obviously from Luther. If you want to, guys, do you want to pick your jaws up off the floor and let us know what you thought?
What was wrong with that? Now we do it in Devon.
I've got to be honest, Luther is one of the things that I can sit and watch with my other half, because it's so far off the scale that, you know, little things like, it seems to be you've got multiple murders happening across London or whatever town it's in, and you just got Luther and a DS investigating it, as opposed to what in reality would be about 200-300 people investigating it. And yeah, so that's why I quite like Luther. That's, of all the things, that's my favourite, and it's well acted and pretty good twist stories in it. So I quite enjoy it. But as policing, it's not. There's very few sort of realisms in there.
It shows a lot of. They always have a DCI, don't they? Running around doing everything. It's always a rank. Why do people give them rank? Because that's not who would do those jobs, is it?
Yeah.
But on TV, you get CID is a promotion on TV, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
So.
Well, Harry is. Yeah. But that's the other thing is that Luther's a DI, and DIs on Murder Squad, they may leave their job, may leave their office on day one, but that's about it. The rest of the time they are in the office. They never get out and about.
Do you think it's like, okay, so you've got your CID, your murder, you know, you've got your Clouseau type stuff. That is so far people can divide. Where it really hurts with me is when you start seeing uniform, when you start seeing scenes of crime people, you know, like the blue light on the way to the police station with the prisoner in the car. Why have you got an emergency light on? You know, they shouldn't. They're silly things. Why do they? I don't know. Does it make it more dramatic?
Well, I think it is. You know, everyone loves to see police cars driving around with the blue lights and two tones on it, don't they? On the TV. I don't think anyone realises the trouble you get into every time you turn them on, and you know, the potential there is to lose your job. Quite realistically, if you make a mistake, even you go through a red light, a camera, it comes through, and you have to justify that themselves. And if you are just transporting a prisoner back, you've got a lot of explaining to do.
We should really highlight the problem with Luther then, obviously, is the DNA and the complete breach of all Police and Criminal Evidence Act by obtaining the DNA and the minor detail of assault, a criminal offence of which he would have lost his job immediately. And then there would have been a mass investigation in 10 years' time where they would say, do you know that they had plainclothes cops smacking people in the nose for their DNA? So they'd have to let all these people out of prison. And so that's why...
To be fair, he was wearing gloves. To be fair, he was wearing gloves. So he, you know,
I noticed the cross-contamination was very good. They prevented cross-contamination. They
did. Very, very good in that respect. But obviously, no job. But actually, having watched that particular episode, it was just to answer his own curiosity, and it was never intended to sort of be evidential in it. Yeah, it was drama, and that's the problem that we've got as you know, the problem I have sitting on the sofa is that I have to detach myself away from the fact that the dramas are being written for all the people that aren't police officers, like my other half, and you know, so it's drama, isn't it? It's drama, but there are a lot of programs, and I think we're going to talk about them in a minute. That is so glaringly, obviously, not realistic, and it waters down nothing.
And so easily slightly adjusted to make it more believable and just as exciting, because you've got to have the drama in. There's no point reading a book and half of it's on the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. That's what most of our job is.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, this is what we were saying, wasn't it? Do people even notice? Is it just we notice because we're in the job? Does it matter? Does it matter is the question. And I think a lot of people know what real now, don't they? They know what real. And if you're going to go beyond that too far, then you can spoil a program, can't you? If you get it wrong.
People are more educated now, I think, aren't they? Because of all the fly-on-the-wall documentaries, because I don't know, social media and that side of things. I think they're more educated. Therefore, I think, like you just said, Lyndon, probably can't get away with so much as you could before, perhaps.
Yeah, it does impact though, because I remember on one of the rare occasions I actually went to court. I was leading a job, possession of a firearm, and the jury asked a whole host of questions that could have only have come from CSI Miami. They watched the night before, you know, and the judge himself actually said these are questions that we're not going to put to the officer because they're not relevant to the case. And he made that comment that this is generated by a television series that you're watching at the moment. You know, all of a sudden people become, because of CSI Miami and because of Silent Witness and because of all this, people become these experts on.
We used to always enjoy it when I was young. I loved court. Court was like a drama to me, and I used to be thinking, right, what are they trying to say? And the best thing was, it's a cliche. You just kept to what you knew, what you remembered. Therefore, you didn't have to start thinking. And so I loved it, and I loved it when people would represent themselves, and they would say, "I put it to you, officer." God's sakes. This is going to be fun.
So thank you for that. Thank you. That's there's a hell of a lot being raised there, and we'll cover that, I think, through the rest of the clips and also hopefully through the questions. We've got some questions coming in, which is great. But Joa, have you got the next clip ready for us, please? Now, I know you've got feelings about this one, but I just want to ask you before we go into it. Is he calling her mom or is he calling her mum?
Mom.
Right,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, right. Well, this is my clip, and it's because the other bit I didn't mention is I was a VIP protection officer as well. So again, every force have their own, and they look after, if any royalty or government officials come in, they come with a real skeleton crew, usually just one personal protection officer. And so they rely on the convoy, the backups, the advance, the others to look after them while they're in their unit. So again, I was an operational finance commander. Devon and Cornwall, we did about 50 to 60 a year. And then I'd go up to London and do the conferences because they rely massively on mutual aid. If we have all the heads of states coming, they rely on everyone. So incredibly privileged job. Looked after the Queen, literally stood next to the Queen 5 times, next to her, the Prime Ministers whilst they're on holiday, having a week with them, good times. So we do exactly the same course as they do. The guy who looks after the Queen permanently, same course. And that includes the driving course. So with that clip, absolutely. So the sniper's getting them. They've got a bulletproof car, if you like, and the glass isn't, so the driver's been taken out. He manages to get them out. Now, the procedures with that normally would, for the backup car, to open out if the principal's been disabled, to run forward, get the principal out, drag them back into the backup car and get the hell out. Now, they'll either both go forward, or if the principal car is blocking, they will get out. And yes, there's all the J-turns, there's all the, you've got to wear the coat, the car like a jacket. The problem then, the rule is you never, ever, ever, ever leave your principal. The principal officer will stay with that principal. It's for the backup to then give that cocoon of safety and allow the principal to not stay and fight, to not get the bad guy, but to disappear into the distance to live another day. Because you're not actually protecting the Home Secretary, you're protecting the position. It's not the person, it's the position that they hold, because it would cause merry hell to look after that. So I talk about it more in my book. It was so subtle, you didn't see that coming in. But anyway, so for him, the way he slightly covers it, which I'll forgive, and I think this is where they had the principal protection officer, the key player there, saying, guys, look after mum. And he then goes up. Now, the guys would have said, don't be stupid. You look after mum. We're going to go and get the guy on the roof. And actually, we're not going to do that. You've reversed the car all the way to the bottom of the skyscraper. We're going to drive all the way hell about. And everyone else, the ARVs are going to deal with the guy on the top. You know, that's it. That's it. And the other thing, very quickly, is on the other side, the ARV side of things in the train, when you've got the suicide bomber. And he has an empathy with her, and he says, no, don't shoot her, don't shoot her. And at that point, you've got 5 or 6 armed response guys relying that the bomber is not going to blow them all up. That would never, ever happen. You're putting all those at risk and putting the benefit of the doubt onto the suicide bomber, however romantic and empathetic it is, if that's a word. But that's my view.
Thank you. And there's a lot to be said as well. This is what you guys say, isn't it? That if he's bound by those rules and requirements, that in itself would give you ample opportunity for drama, because he's got a whole new set of barriers to overcome, as in he's got to do his job first, even though what he really wants to do is get out of the car and
exactly and
get up the stairs.
Every practical and the training we do it's national, exactly the same cross, and it's very physical, and it's constant decision. Right, what are you doing now? What's the drive? So you're in driver position in backup car, the car blows, right, I'm looking, there's a bomb goes off there, or is it just paparazzi? Or is it just a crowd? Or is it just what's your level? Where are you going in? That's the bit being tested. The shooting the guns bit, that's the easy bit, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it's that constant decision making. What's your decision? And I'd say he probably made the wrong one there.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think if it's all right, we'll go on to the next clip now, Joey, if you're ready.
Confirm you are the officer using the call sign Victor Charlie 51.
I am.
Document 2 on your folders. This FA1 was issued to AFOs at Southbury Police Station on the day of 13th of May of this year.
You recognise that form? I do, sir.
Okay, now I think we all know about that show. Over to you.
Line of duty is a massive problem for me. And that one clip just sums it all up for me. First of all, there's got an interview room there that's got glass partitioned and is open. It appears to be in the middle of a working office, and something that would never, ever, ever happen. Second thing you've got in that interview room is a uniformed sergeant being interviewed by a detective sergeant, a detective inspector, and a detective superintendent. I mean, that, again, would never, ever, ever happen. The detective superintendent, or the superintendent, seems to spend an awful lot of time in those interview rooms. No superintendent would have been in an interview room for years and years. Certainly from the DIs onwards, upwards, they just do not get involved in that sort of thing at all. And then there's sort of rules on sort of procedure there. That's so much oppression on that uniformed sergeant. You know, have all those three ranks bearing down on you, asking you questions there. That just would break every kind of procedural process going. But it's the other things in that program. They do silly things, like they use acronyms all the time that even I'm going, I've never heard of that. I don't know what they're talking about, and they completely lose me sometimes. They make it sound as if that's the language that we talk in, and we do talk in acronyms. We do, and even now, in 3 years down the road, I do it, but not to the extent that they're doing it there. And they also refer to themselves as Detective Sergeant Smith or Detective Sergeant Jones, and they talk to each other in those terms as well constantly. That is completely unrealistic, certainly from the CID side of things. That referring to people by rank is outdated and hasn't happened in the certain 25 years that I was in the branch as well. Lots of problems with it. I know it's very, very popular, so it's probably me in a minority, but it's one of those I have to leave the room when it's on, I'm afraid.
I watched one and I couldn't watch it again. And then further down the line, people were saying it's amazing, you've got to watch it. And I thought I must give it another go, but it hurt so much to watch the first one. I do, and I think that's probably because it's so much closer to home, being uniform, being on the street. Do you think, because in the police, certainly in armed response, in firearms side of things, and traffic, it's role related, it's not rank related. The role that you're trained to do, that specialism, is so much more important than your rank. And the role related PC will completely outrank the inspector, superintendent, in the specialism, so to speak. So a superintendent would never overrule a PC if the PC is the family liaison officer, or if they're the interview specialist and things like that. That's quite right. It should be like that. So yeah. I think, do you think then is that the public are still awed by, it's got to be a detective chief inspector, otherwise it's not a very important job?
Well, I don't think the public are, but I do think it's common amongst all programs. You know, it's always DIs, it's always DCI. You know, all the people that are doing them down in the dirt weed work is that sort of rank level. So I think there is not a lack of knowledge, and that's probably too harsh a term. But I think it's sexy to say, yeah, DI. It's a lot more sexy to say that. A detective constable, for instance, but yeah, you know,
I was in Flint House, the convalescent, first time. I managed to get just in the end of my thing, and I met a woman there who basically looked like anyone next door, and her role was a murder team DI, and I went, oh, I'd love to have had it. I'd love to pick up the phone and say that I murder team. that's what I wanted. But I hear there's a few courses first.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got loads of questions you'll be glad to know. So I think it's probably time for the fourth and final clip now. Joa, off you go. Thank you.
I'm arresting you on possession of a Class A drug.
Seems like a potential source. We'll drop the charge if you enroll in our informant program.
You want me to grass? Nah, mate.
I'm keeping your mum out of trouble.
She's undocumented.
I don't know any terrorists, bruv. You're not that kind of an informant. Go to the places I can't. Well, like Ministry of Sound and Cargo? Or you mean like mosques and palm wallas and that?
Hey, what do you think?
This again is mine. You know, the informant handling world is a murky world, but it's one that is tightly controlled. There's a whole raft of legislation, case studies, and informants is not one that you will get away with because of the sort of overview and constant assessment of it. And in that clip, they are basically coercing someone into becoming an informant. They are threatening him with dropping a case, or threatening him with, you know, imprisonment and all that sort of stuff. And they can't do that. You can't drop a case. You know, it's only in the highest end crime, in extreme cases, will they sort of look at what your advantage to the criminal justice system will be before they actually release you from any sort of punishment in that respect. So you've got that. You've also got, oh yeah, we can keep your family here, we'll get them booted out of the country as well. Again, the police cannot have that sort of influence. And I was on witness protection and informant handling as well. And in witness protection, we were dealing with people from all over the world. And a lot of them were saying, oh, I've helped you in court, you know, that justifies me staying in the country. And whilst we would write a letter saying, yeah, they have helped in court, it had no bearing. It was down to the actual tribunal itself to make that decision. So those days of, you know, where people make comments to judges in the back room, if they ever existed, they certainly don't exist. They exist now. So I get why they've got this guy in, but. And also, can I just say that the tiny bit of Class A drugs he had, he'd get a slap on the wrist for that. Yeah. Certainly not enough to risk his life on an infiltration unit like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, what I'm making notes already, because all of these things, I'm just thinking that's just extra spice in the story. You know, these extra little bits of things that people have to do the job. So if it's okay, we'll move on to questions now, and I'm going to read out the first question, and then I'd like to queue up Rachel, who had a question about missing persons investigations. So the first question comes from Wendy, and Wendy, it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's about 4 or 5, and we could do all of them and be here for the rest of the half hour. So I'm going to do the first bit and the last bit, if that's okay. So Wendy asks, how are we doing at portraying women in the forces? And what's the best and worst example you've seen in your time on the job and in the media of women taking on an equal role or being relegated to a secondary position?
I could talk about equal role very quickly on armed response. Female sergeants taken over from my role on my section, and she was quite new to firearms. It's fascinating, actually. You think, and it must be as well if you're of a minority group of any type, is you think it's fine, but then you realize it's actually, as a female, she feels that not only does she have to prove herself as a new sergeant, but also as a female. And I think she puts a lot of that pressure on herself. And that's where, you know, 4-person entry team into a building, right, clothes on, helmets on, go, let's do this. And if it's on training, and then it gets meticulously taken apart, and we're all capable of going, oh, yeah, why did I do that? Oh, yeah, right, or whatever. Now, she automatically says to me afterwards, do you know what? I just feel I've got to get it right first time, because if anyone wants to criticize, that's criticize. With that side of things, the fitness test, exactly the same. The shooting, exactly the same. The assessment, it's a bit like the informants. I have known my instructors for many years, and they still fail me. It's not like, oh, he'll be all right on the day, he's fine. It's too professional. So we know this female officer, she had 1 child, and she thought she'd have another baby, and she had triplets. So she's now got 4 children, and she's 30 hours, and she's a VIP protection officer, armed response officer, sergeant, and phenomenal how she juggles all that. But I can quite honestly say my experiences from the other males is that whoever's got there deserves to be there, and they don't even think of the female side of things. But I'm not naive enough to think it never happens.
Yeah, I sort of agree with that to a lot extent, because you know, so I'll be honest, some of the best cops I've known are females. And that's, and you know, when I talked about I was taking off the uniform in 1996, that coincided with a time when a lady called Nina Mackay was killed, stabbed to death. And I knew her really well. She's a good friend of mine. We went through training school, and you know, and she was at the same borough as I was, same division I was. And she was kick-ass girl. She would kick that shit. And the reason she died is she went through the door, but she was the one with the enforcer, and fell through. Unfortunately, fell through and exposed a sort of a gap in her body armor that was exploited. So, from training school right the way through, the females in police are some really strong, exceptional characters. It saddens me that any lady is certainly in the police, it feels that that being a female is getting in the way of their career. And I've never experienced that, so I couldn't comment in that respect. But what I will say is that there's a lot of good female officers in here, and the fact that they're female is completely irrelevant to me as well.
And I agree with that. I mean, when I was on the murder team, it was almost half and half, you know, males and females, and you know, it wasn't that we would suddenly go, oh, we'll pick him because he's a bloke before she's a woman. They were equal. You have people who are good, you have people who are bad, you have people who are average, like in all walks of life. And the sex really didn't come into it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you for that. So next up is Rachel, and then Emily Isaacs has a question about 1915, which should be interesting. But Rachel, if you could unmute yourself, please.
Hiya. Lovely listening to you chat. I could listen for hours. I'm going to generalise my question a bit more. It was quite specific before. Historical procedures, not too far back. I'm talking 90s and 70s, and I know we shouldn't really count 90s as historical. We're not that old, are we? How hard is it to get the details of the procedures at those times? I mean, for me, I'm writing a novel and I need to know what a witness statement would look like and what a lost person statement would look like in the early 90s. And I'm very fussy about getting it right because my mum was a nurse and would shout at the TV every time they got things wrong.
Yeah. So in the 90s, there was a bit of a big changeover with the way that statements were written. I remember the way I was taught a statement at Hendon was a lot different to the way that the people that I joined the team with had been taught. And then it changed even further with it. Remember the good evidence takes time. Was the slogan that was pretty much dominant. So before that, and it's before that change in the mid to early 90s, it was just a matter of fact. I went in, I saw this, I arrested that person, and statements usually just maybe 5 or 6 lines. Nowadays, they can be 20, 30 pages. You know, and if when I was training people, if they came back to me and did a statement about just a simple arrest of a shoplifter, it was only 3 or 4 lines, I would say, what on earth is this? What are you doing? What was the condition? You know, all kinds of things will influence the actual statement. But to go back to your answer, yeah, it was very basic before the 90s.
Okay.
I mean, a 10-second thing. I actually put one of my statements in here.
Brilliant. I've got it flagged up, ready to buy.
What's the name of that book again?
In fairness, it wasn't from the 90s, that particular one, but it is very much about, yes, it's Chenta. I said, don't just put the evidence, you've got to paint the picture. You've got to make them there. You've got to make them feel the fear, the anticipation, the you know, about the size of the crowd, all that side of things. Before, I remember taking a little because I'm a touch typist, my little typewriter, and I used to go to the shop that had been burgled and had its coffee money stolen, or I used to take an Argos catalogue, so I could go down the different rings and people could point out which one it was. And I used to type it out, time, day, date, place, on a standard. And it didn't change for a long time, the actual paperwork, did it? Until it went into a little bit more high tech. I think we've all got some old nostalgic memories, and people could dig around and get some information for you. I really do get it quite.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. There's a guy called Mike Mansfield who's a barrister, a defence barrister, who he's not very popular with police, but I actually think he's done more for policing than most people, because he's put the fear of God up coppers. And, you know, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And that's the mantra. And so before he came along, before the 90s, if it wasn't written down, they didn't care. But nowadays, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And
that's what I actually want to hear.
Yeah.
Much better in a novel.
Yeah.
Rachel, thank you so much. So Emily, you're up next, and then after you, it's going to be Alan Smith with a question about interesting parts of your job. So Emily, could you unmute yourself, please?
Hi, and thank you for coming to give the talk. It's really interesting. Similarly to Rachel, a project that I've been working on and another one that I'm brewing are based even further back. One's in 1915 and one's in the 50s. And although I can obviously do a certain amount of research through reading biographies and doing ancestry work and looking at information online that's about communities in those eras, that, as Rachel says, it's getting to the nitty-gritty of it and making sure that you're not making your police characters do something that they really would not have done. You know, for example, something like I had 3 women in a cell. And originally when I wrote the scene, it was just them and the policeman, and it was only through doing my research that I suddenly realised that they would have had like a chaperone who would have been a matron. So it's kind of getting those kind of details that's really quite hard work. So I just wondered if any of you knew where there was somewhere where we could go to get more information about that kind of thing.
There is, in Devon and Cornwall, there are like museums and specialists. If you literally go, I'd try 101 initially on the email, not the phone, but the email or something, and just say, there are, because then it's like slow timing, not putting people out. But in Devon and Cornwall, for example, there's museums and there's people who are really into that study of history of that particular force. So I'd find out the one that you're particularly talking about. There will be experts or people, even if they're civilians. This guy's a control room guy. And what he doesn't know about historical events in Devon and Cornwall and policing is not worth knowing.
There's loads of Facebook pages as well now, posts, groups that are popping up left, right and centre with a lot of people from that era that, you know, you can get hold of them. You should talk to Lyndon Smith from Consulting Cops. He'll sort it out for you.
Send us an email. Send us an email and we'll find out for you.
Brilliant. That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Wow. That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Emily, for the question. So, Alan, you're up next. And then I'm going to ask a question on behalf of Dee, which I suspect is going to be quite dear to your hearts. But first, it's Alan. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Done and done. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So what's something that you think is really interesting or really engaging about your job that you don't see on screen?
But
go on.
Sorry. For me, it's and I think for Lyndon as well. Hopefully, I think the family liaison side of things. I know that we had the Bay recently, which was okay. But there's an awful lot of stuff that's going on with Grenfell, with the Manchester Arena tragedy, and even with Sousa I was involved in. That there's drama there. There's drama, and it's such an intense role, that family liaison side of things, that it's unique to the UK as well. It's something that isn't done outside of the UK, and it's something that's impacted on the courts as well. Our courts are now more victim friendly because of the role of the family liaison officer. You know, and so that'd be something that for me it would be quite interesting to see there. And there's drama galore there. There's drama galore.
It's important that people do research that role, don't they? Because a lot of the public, I think, just think family liaison is you being social services, while the inquiry is going on, when really it's an investigation tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Learn how the victims lived, how they've died, to help us solve that crime. It's not just we're holding someone's hand, we're doing their shopping for them while they're going through that grieving stage. That's not the main role for an FLO, is it?
Yeah. And the family liaison role highlights failings in other areas, like you said, it's like the holiday industry, you know, how they look after people who die abroad. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office don't particularly do a really good job in that respect whatsoever, and they are getting more involved with us. We've got FLOs permanently based in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office now. So it is a role that could be expanded, definitely dramatised.
Yeah, I personally, for me, especially working on specialist teams and things like that, and having worked on response in a team, then on response, just the training and whatever, it's a cliche, but it's like that teamwork is that thing. And I see a lot of on TV where you get people and they're like, "Oi, you did that on me," and they're up against the locker. I mean, that really, okay, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but it's very, very rare. You are a family. You've got your one who's funny. You've got your one who's brilliant at intel. You've got your one who's absolutely brilliant on tactics. The one who's on law. They are a complete bunch of misfits that fit together to make the perfect team. And it's just that camaraderie. And I've just had a message this morning from somebody in Newcastle who's saying, I've been in the job for 2 years. I'm really worried about not I'm really worried, but have you got any advice for me with the protests coming up? We're going to be in the thick of it and this, that and the other. And I said, do you know what? When you're getting harangued from all directions, from the media, from the government, from the bosses, from the public, from everyone, the only important people are you and your colleagues in your immediate network. And you make sure you guys are happy and you make sure you look after each other, and everything else doesn't matter. And that, I think, is the bit where you see I would have a team that was usually quite happy and jokey, and everyone else, there was quite a few sort of just quite serious, you know, and and making the most of everyone's character, each individual characters. ARVs are not all the same. They're not all macho, bloody guns and all that. We knew nothing about any other guns apart from the ones we shot, you know? We were not experts on guns. Most Americans would, and or Canadians. Have I really flipped it now? What are you? I've just really insulted someone. Sorry.
The three of you just pitched a brilliant comedy drama series.
But my friend, but you'd know so much more about British armed response cops on their guns generally, because that's not the important bit for us. It's that team. It's that being part of a very special, and it is lovely to stick a gun up some bully's nose who's just done suicide with his girlfriend and then gone off saying he's going to shoot the kids, which was something that happened with us. So yeah, don't get me wrong, that's quite satisfying, but that's not really what it's all about.
And one thing that I never see is with regards to murder teams now. I was on a murder team for the last 10 years in East London, and whenever it's on TV, they're just dealing with one crime, aren't they? Yeah. We have 12 to 15 murders on the go at one time. And it was almost, I don't want to go and help with that murder because I've got my own murder that happened last week to deal with. Yeah. And I know it's difficult with drama because obviously they want to concentrate on one story, but the reality is you are being pulled from pillar to post. You know, you're at court, you're dealing with old jobs, you're trying to take them to the coroner. And that would be nice if you saw that sometime, you know, that people are being pulled all over the place on different inquiries, not just on that one that they've got the story on.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you. So I'm going to ask a question from Dee, and then I think there's another question to ask out. We just need to double check a couple of background issues first. But the question from Dee is, can each of the speakers, so there's no hiding here, name one TV show, crime drama or other, that they feel is closest to the truth for British crime, that would give writers a good feel for where to aim if they don't want to be too fantastical?
For me, good inquiry, Scott and Bailey. Scott and Bailey, they did that really well. I think there was a DCI attached to it somehow, and they talk about all the roles they're doing. The main characters were a DC and a DS, are they? I think at the beginning. I haven't seen the latest series, but that's about the best for me with regards to murder inquiries.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. I'm going way back. The bill, you know, the bill was really good. I know it was congealed into half an hour, but it got that team morale. It got the complexities over of that, and I quite enjoyed that. So since then, I don't think there's been one that is as realistic.
Do you know why is Juliet Bravo sticking in my head? I'm really old. But yeah, and the bill, I'm not going to hook onto that one because that's the obvious one. I just suddenly realised that why is it I tend to go for the more dramatic ones then that are not connected, are not too close to it. And I'm thinking of all these cop shows. I'm thinking, oh, I like that. No, not realistic. So it just shows it's the drama. I also joke that if I watch something too similar, I put in an hour's overtime, treat it as training. Yeah. You know, I don't really want to see that. Doesn't get me. I don't watch those things. But the bill was earlier on in my career and before my career, and I loved that. And yeah, you're right, because that really brought in the stress. Police and criminal evidence, that all, you know, had just come in, so to speak, wouldn't it? It was in for a while now, but so I am going to chicken out a bit, really. I can't think of another one. I
think that sums it up in that cops, we really don't watch.
No.
I'll watch American cop programs all the time, but I don't really. I've not watched the one that Lyndon mentioned. I've not watched it. Because I've just turned away from that sort of thing because it does get on my nerves a little bit. And that's probably a failing in my behalf, as my other half tells me on a constantly. It's you know, you need to relax a little bit. But that's the problem with cop. When you're a cop, you're a cop. Even though we've left the job, we're still cops. You know, and we're still giving them. You know, we think we know best and we think we know everything, and we're quite happy to tell you that as well. And so. Yeah, it's probably more our failing than that, really. It's right, like Lyndon said right at the beginning. I wonder if it's just us.
But it just shows, doesn't it? The more exciting stuff, the less realistic, probably does attract more attention. But I was asked recently, for example, and this is why I think it's important. I was asked recently with consulting cops. I was given a job about someone who had died in a road traffic collision, and because they had relatives elsewhere, they just wanted to know the link between, would it be family liaison to family liaison, would it be somebody else, would it be da-da-da-da. So I was able to give them real good detail on that and the scene, and how many would be there, and how many people, and would the superintendent be there, or how many actually at that scene, and how far big is that scene. So getting those details, you, instead of putting the scene was 3 miles long, you can actually say, well, no, the scene would be from this point because it's relevant, and that point to it's relevant. So you might as well get that bit right. And that's where I think Consulting Cops gets right. So even if the rest of it is dramatic and unnecessary, you know, and sort of non-realistic, it's the bits that you're gonna have to say something, you might as well get those right. You know.
I think one of my favourite films is Hot Fuzz, and that's totally unrealistic, but the police jokes in it, the lines, everything is so good. And I loved it. It was Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg wrote it, didn't they? What they said they did, they watched 130 films, cop films, and they interviewed 50 cops. Went out and interviewed cops, and you look at those stories.
I've had 2 swans in the back of my patrol car, I'll have you know. And I've ran across a fish pond and over a fence because my partner wasn't big enough to go through it. But obviously, so I've always thought of
that goes back to Lyndon as well, saying that I think some of the consultants on it are too far up the ladder, and they've lost a sort of little bit of reality on it.
And what you're saying there, though, I think speaking to those consultants about, and there was an ACC was one.
Yeah.
They know that the CID doesn't run in front and tell me, an operational firearms commander, that I've done, literally I do 4 days training every 6 weeks I used to do, the courses were 5 weeks long, and they don't run in front in their suit and point to the left room and say, search there. You know, that just doesn't happen. And I come in with my gun behind. And so you're quite right. You don't want to do the 4-man team or 4-person team and give the tactical way. And to be honest, that bit's boring. We can excuse a bit of weapon sweep and not conforming to, but for goodness sake, the CID comes in and shows I'm boss.
Yeah. I'll back that up. As a detective, I've done dozens of armed entries, and I've not been in one.
You don't want to be in one, do you? You don't want to be near the gun.
No, that's for them.
Well, I hide behind one. I'm perfectly safe.
Yeah, you look at the three of us, don't you? Me and Miles, detectives. Look at us. The armed response officer. Look at him.
Yeah.
Horses, isn't it? Horses.
How come Hot Fuzz came out then?
I think I had 2 swans in the back of the car. It's probably going to be the headline for this when we put it on the website. So I've got a question from Sarah, and it relates to a question that was asked previously. And this might be the last one of the session because it's 5:02 now. But Sarah wants to know, we've obviously been asked about aspects of your job that you've not seen portrayed. But is there anything that you haven't seen on TV in a police drama that you'd like to see?
Yeah, well, for me, I think I've got to go to the fact that there's a bit more liaison between, because you can make that dramatic entrance with the 4-person team. They've got the stunts, they've got, you know, we've got all that stuff. You can make it look wary and stuff, but you need to see the delegation to the role of responsibility can be just as exciting as, you know, and by all means have them say, just don't let me down on this one. He's got to, you know, you've got to get this one. He's, you know, da-da-da. You can get all that in, but it's so old-fashioned to have the person running, you know, walking past all the scenes of crime in their one-piece suits, their masks, their gloves, and they pick up an exhibit and look over it and say, yeah, print that. And you know, it's just, no, just stop it. It's unnecessary.
Yeah, I'd like to see. I think silent witnesses is one of the things that annoys most police officers, and that the cooperation between agencies. It's really pretty good, and a lot of lessons have been learned, because in the past the cooperation was terrible. I'm doing a little bit of work for the National Crime Agency now on the Rotherham sex offences matter, and it was awful 15-20 years ago. So it would be better. It would be nice if they sort of highlighted the joint approach to you know, making it better, making it right, accepting that sometimes things slip through the crack and bad things happen. But yeah, that's one of the things I would like to see, the multi-agency approach to problems.
Because, Miles, don't you think the biggest change with the data protection, since the Data Protection Act, and people were petrified and they hid behind that, I mean, and said, oh, we can't swap our information. But once there was a channel put through with other agencies so you could do that, then the confidence came in, I think, didn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, I agree entirely with that.
It's already been mentioned what I think teamwork, what Harry was on about and Miles was on about. You know, everything is team. And I know drama is based on, there's a hero, isn't it? And they've got to do these things. And that's why you've got the DCI running around the street doing things that they would never do, because they're the hero and that's what the show is about. So.
And also, one thing I've got to say about the team, especially nowadays, is that when something's done wrong, that's when the team kicks in and should be stopping whatever is being done wrong. Now, I know there are incidents, and there are incidences where you know, where the team haven't stepped in, stopped it. But in the vast majority of it, that team, that there'll be one person that say, "Hey, stop doing that."
And that is the rank structure of firearms teams, is why you have operational firearms commander, team leader, so to speak. You have the firearms tactics advisor, you have a tactical firearms commander, strategic firearms commander. They've got their roles, so they can say, whoa, things have changed now. Let's spin that wheel. Let's look, what's the information that's changed? Right, why are we still tunnel visioning down here? And that process, the whole point is why there's that little stop, start, in order to prevent what you've just said, Miles, is things running away, and then we just thinking of the target and forgetting that everything's changed, and why we actually do. We're putting so much more risk now, unnecessary risk. Well, we could just nick him when he gets home from work. You know, that's it.
Wow,
Right.
thank you. No, sorry, Miles, go on.
No, I was just going to say, on one of my murder teams, so one of the senior investigating officers, he had someone whose sole job was to prove that the person that we had in custody didn't do it. All right.
Yeah.
You know, and he would sit there and, you know, give him, the bloke would spend ages on the Holmes computer, which is the one that dominates the inquiry, and his sole job was to say, oh yeah, these are the issues that you might face, or, you know, we've got the wrong person because of this, that and the other.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Wow, there's a show. I mean, what a lot of the things you're saying remind me of The Martian, the movie, as in,
which is a great.
Yeah, and it's about a group of people doing their best to make the most of an impossible situation, and there's so much conflict and drama just from that.
Yeah. If you look at incidences, and I remember this. Do you remember the Glasgow the dustbin lorry that ran amok and unfortunately killed 6 people? All right, there is CCTV taken from that, and there is a whole hundreds of people running that, and there's about 4 people running that way towards wherever it is, and I think 3 of them were nurses and 1 of them was an off-duty cop.
Wow.
You know,
amazing. Thank you so much. Before we do anything else, I just want to do a quick call out to Lila, Joa, and B, who've been working behind the scenes to help run the session. They've done an amazing job today. We usually, at this point, unmute everybody to say a quick goodbye, and I can't find the button on my screen, so I'm desperately looking to see if one of the other hosts can do it. Or should we just ask everybody to do it themselves? Yeah. So on my count of 3, if everyone can just do it. 1, 2, 3, unmute yourselves and say thank you and goodbye to our presenters.
Thank you. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you. That was
Y'all are wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.
Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant.